So welcome, everybody. I would like to welcome everyone to this presentation sponsored by the International Association for Peace and Economic Development, which is one of the primary associations of the Universal Peace Federation. In this series of webinars that is held every Tuesday, we're looking at the pivotal role of Korea, both North Korea and South Korea, in today's world. And I'm sure everybody is aware of the conflict that is going on in the Ukraine now. But this conflict on the Korean Peninsula has been going on much longer. And what we see today in Ukraine, I think in many respects, is a mirror of what has been occurring in Korea for the last 70 years. So we would like to look today at some of the special economic zones and the different programs that North Korea has set up over the years to try and create economic cooperation with the rest of the world, and see how effective or perhaps ineffective they have been at accomplishing that. And we have two very special guests today. Mr. Bill Brown has a long history of looking at the economics of Korea, and he is going to discuss the Kaesong Industrial Park and also the Kumgangsan tourist region. And these two areas that Korea set up in order to promote this kind of cooperation. And the Kaesong Industrial Park operated from 2004 to 2016 as like a collaborative economic development with South Korea. It's located about 10 kilometers just inside the border of North Korea and has direct connection between North and South Korea through both rail and road links. And then we're going to have Mr. Paul Chia, who will talk about possible economic investment opportunities. He runs a software company in the Netherlands, and he has visited Korea many times and has a lot of insight into how Western companies or companies in the rest of the world can actually work with North Korea in order to create some kind of a business relationship or invest in that part of the world. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. William Brown. And Mr. Brown is a member of the board of directors of the Korean Economic Institute of America. He's the chair of the George Washington University's North Korean Economic Forum in the Institute of Korean Studies. Now, it's a long title, but we summarize that as GWICS. He also teaches contemporary China at the University of Maryland. He is an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's School of Foreign Service, where he teaches occasional courses on Chinese, Japanese, and Korean economics. He's interviewed frequently on many different radio and TV shows, Voice of America, Radio Free Asia, the Wall Street Journal, and the Korea Times. And he has also consulted and worked with the CIA, the Commerce Department, and the National Intelligence Council. But most interestingly, I think he lived in Korea for 20 years or more and has a deep insight into the Korean people. And we're really fortunate to have him to share today about his experience, both personal and through academics, about these economic zones. Mr. William Brown, over to you.
Okay, thanks a lot. I should also say I'm retired from the U.S. government. I spent 35 years in CIA and the U.S. Commerce Department, and I worked in the embassy in Seoul. So I've dabbled around with Korea for most of my life. Actually, I went there when I was 1 year old, so that should count for something. But unlike Paul, who you'll hear later, I've just been to North Korea one time. And, being in the U.S. government, it's hard to talk to North Koreans. So I haven't had a lot of experience actually talking or certainly doing business with them. So I think the two of us sort of are nicely complement each other here. I titled my little talk here, hopefully it won't be very long, Kaesong and Kumgangsan, lessons still to be learned. And I have a couple of main points. Let me give you those at the beginning, and then we can sort of dabble around. Main points are outside economic engagement with North Korea over the past 75 years has been a little short of catastrophic, both from the foreign engager side and from the Korean recipient. The country, I think, was better off in 1945 than it is now. Can you say that about any other country in the world? I don't think so. But I think it was better off 75 years ago. The country is now full of derelict industrial facilities and buildings all over the country that were paid for usually by well-motivated, but unthinking foreign governments, including our own, speaking as an American, including our own. And I want to focus on two sort of bigger experiments, bigger examples, this Kaesong Industrial Zone and the Kumgangsan Tourist Complex. They were both created after the iconic Kim Dae-jung, Kim Il-sung summit talk of the year 2000. And they formed the core of Kim Dae-jung's, quote, sunshine policy toward North Korea. I don't want to really do this for a history talk, and I'm not a historian, but I want to use it sort of as a lesson for current and future engagement with North Korea, of the kind Paul is doing, I think. Both projects now are closed and kind of rotting away, you can say. But in theory, they could still be both reopened to good effect, I think, but only with a realistic and principled economic development focus. Let me see if I can share, just to get a sense of where they are. A map here. Sorry, I want to go. Here you can, I think you can see on the slide, here in the middle is Kaesong, here's Seoul and Pyongyang. Here's Kaesong. It's really, we spell it with a K in America. It's really a better spell with a G, sort of Kaesong. Roger pronounced it just exactly right. And I don't. Kaesong, Kaesong Industrial Complex. Here's, and also Kumgangsan up here, if you can see my arrow, up here on the opposite side of the DMZ, the northeast coast. Here's a close-up of that same area. If you've been to Korea, you've probably been to Incheon Airport down here. Incheon, Seoul, and Kaesong make kind of an equidistant triangle there. So when you land at Incheon Airport, you're as close to the Kaesong industrial site as you are to Seoul, where you're probably going. It's that close. And then more close up, even there, is the actual zone right here. This is Panmunjom. You may have visited Panmunjom, where they have their talks. DMZ is this area here. So you can see it's very, very close to South Korea. And in fact, before the Korean War, Kaesong was part of, they divided Korea along the 38th parallel. Kaesong is south of the 38th parallel. It's the one city that North Korea got as a result of the Korean War. It's an ancient city. It was the capital of Korea just before they moved it to Seoul back in around 1400. So it's got a lot of history there and a lot of important political significance to that city. It's not a big city, 200,000 people. But anyway, here's the complex that we'll be talking about a little bit later. Let me stop share for a minute. I'll go back to that. I want to talk about these lessons, though, that we need to be learning before anything else can really start out, I think. And these are my views. Other Korean people, Korean government has a lot of its own views, which are certainly important here. But my three lessons are, first, economic aid can be a very dangerous activity. There are winners and losers. And in North Korea's case, I think the impact of a lot of aid has been to wreck the need for reform, and thus the viability of market reforms, and in particular development of an export-oriented industry. They were very good exporters in 1945. Now they're about the worst exporters in the whole world. B, a second lesson, activities need to be transparent to the donors and to the taxpayers, or they'll be doomed to failure. A lot of trust has been lost in dealings with North Korea by our governments. And I think for the taxpayers, for the public, trust needs to be restored. And the best way to do that is to be very transparent. Thirdly, in terms of economic development, we really need to look at the principles of economic development and not political expediency. Of these, I think one thing that comes through to me in this Kaesong project especially, a little bit Kumgangsan, is the need for real money to be paid directly to the workers, driving the workers' productivity and their own freedom. It seems simple, but our experiences in North Korea have been, no, it's not at all simple. Now, in 2004, it was my only trip to North Korea and to Kumgangsan. It was the so the 10th anniversary of Kim Il-sung's death. And I was invited along with 3 other American sort of Korea watchers by the Ministry of Unification to go to South Korea and to observe the opening of the Kaesong Industrial Zone. After we got to Seoul, MNU told us that North Korean authorities had told us we were kind of disinvited. But instead, they worked out a wonderful trip to Kumgangsan, which I was actually much more pleased with. I don't think the other 3 were so pleased, but I was very happy with that. But why were we disinvited? I've never got the full story, but I think part of it was several of us, myself included, had written articles that were kind of critical, in a way, of Kaesong. And my criticism then, as it is now, all throughout this period, has been the project did not focus on the payment, direct payment to the current North Korean workers. 18 years later and $1 billion later, we have a demolished liaison building. You saw that on the screen, on the introductory screen. And I think soon to be demolished hotels in Kumgangsan. They may be being destroyed as we speak. I still think this is the main principle we have to think of when we engage North Korea. Workers need to be paid directly in cash. It's hard to do since Orthodox Marxists in Pyongyang know, they still know, the liberating impact of money paid to workers. Why is this so important? Well, in socialist systems like North Korea's and elsewhere, they like to try to avoid markets and the use of money. Instead, the government or its agents pay not money that can be circulate and accumulate, and most importantly, privately invested. Instead, they like to pay with coupons, ration, tickets, other kinds of things. Anything, now we'd say non-fungible tokens, things they can't use for anything else. It's a devious way of controlling the population and an extremely inefficient economic device that ensures their poverty. Everywhere the system has been employed, it's led to famine, spectacularly in the Soviet Union and in China and even in North Korea. So I argued in 2004 that if the zone was going to be an exemplar for economic development worthy of South Korean subsidy, wages need to be paid in cash and the money allowed to circulate within at least the local Kaesong community. 53,000 workers that they ended up with, that's a lot of people. You figure a multiplier of 3 or 4, that's the income, the people hired from the money earned by the workers spend the money, and that creates more and more and more. The money circulates. You probably get, including their families, you'd probably get close to 1 million people captured in that market economy that could have developed. Now, it's not just me, of course, who thinks that, but I didn't really think our U.S. government or the South Korean government paid enough attention to that kind of economic detail that, to me, at least as an economist, is so important. The International Labor Organization, the ILO, the Article 5 says, let me read it, wages shall be paid directly to the worker concerned, except as may be otherwise provided by national laws. Now, I don't know about the exception, but that first clause is so darn important. Now, virtually all countries in the world are members of the ILO, including South Korea, the U.S. China is a member. Russia is a member. There's one country that's not. Can you imagine which one is not a member of the ILO? It's North Korea. So that should be one of the first prerequisites dealing with North Korea. They need to join the ILO. Now, it's complicated. I won't go through the whole story of how they're paid. The zone actually said, in the law of the zone said they are to be paid cash. It's just they were paid in U.S. dollars. The Korean company, South Korean company, would pay the North Korean agent U.S. dollar cash. It started out to be $50 a month. But the way it ended up getting to the North Korean worker was through a terrible official exchange rate. That was like 1/10 of the real exchange rate. So they got just a tiny bit of real money and not a livable amount. They're basically paid by rations. They were given what they needed. It's kind of like an army, conscript army, or in slavery. In slavery, you never pay slaves money because what'll they do? They'll buy their way out. They'll pay their way out. So you don't. So I liken it to kind of a slave system. Now, the problem with the tricky way they're paid, the Korean government, I thought, to me and to others, sort of hid this big problem. Even the media didn't catch on to it. They all think that the North Korean workers got paid $50, and it rose over time to maybe $75, something like that. That's a month. That's not much money. But even that, they weren't paid. They were paid about 4,000 or 5,000 won, and one won, take 4,000 won then. It's like a few kilograms of rice a month, just ridiculous. Now, it's easy to be critical of Kaesong. After all, it's shut down, closed. And there's a huge loss of capital by South Korean taxpayers. But the project itself was really quite interesting, and a lot of good things happened there. Really sort of proves the point that economic development can occur if you get the right prerequisites. Let me show you a little bit of data from a group called NCNK. They have a great web page that provides this data here. So here's this is up at the top, NCNK. You can look it up on their website. Here's the development from 2004 to 2016. You can see a big increase. Focus not on the top line, which is aggregate. Focus on the blue line and the red line. Now the red line, I'm colorblind, so I might make a mistake. The red line is South Korean exports or North Korean imports. Okay, it's high at the beginning because that's all the equipment that's going into Kaesong. And then over time, it becomes mostly the inputs, the raw materials that are going for the parts that are being assembled in Kaesong. And the blue line is the North Korean exports of the products. So that you can see it rises to quite a substantial amount, $1.3 billion by 2015, then it closes down. Here, this shows the output of the zone. It's mostly textiles, but odds and ends, a lot of other odds and ends, but it's mostly textiles. And then the employees, you can see this is remarkable. It goes up to 53,000 North Korean workers. That's a lot of people. Interesting to me is by the end, most of the workers were in the 40s. They're women, mostly women, and they're mostly in their 40s. And then the ROK side, the total of about 780, I think, enterprises at the end. These are small companies that go in there and work. They're under the umbrella of Hyundai Asan and Korea Land Corporation. But there are a lot of little companies that are doing this, and they have a total of about a little over 1,000 South Korean managers. So that, that really suggests quite a big enterprise there, 53,000 workers. And the Korean enterprises were making money basically off that very low labor costs. They were paying, I think, a total of about $140 per worker per month, which by international standards is very low. Now, my argument, though, is that the North Korean worker wasn't getting very much of that. That was, I thought, the major problem. Okay, so let's move then quickly to Kumgangsan, what they call, it means Diamond Mountains in English. I was really happy to go to Kumgangsan because I have some nice pictures I want to show you, and just a couple, don't worry. But I was really happy to go there because my mother and father went to high school in Pyongyang. They went there on their high school senior trip in 1939 and talked about it. It's a beautiful site, it really is, and one of the most beautiful parts of Asia, East Asia. I think it's got that reputation. This sort of iconic Korean Oriental mountain you see in their paintings all the time with the pine trees, steep mountains. Very, very interesting place to go. And hopefully at some point they'll open it again. Here's one of my best pictures, I think. This is really nice. It was raining the 3 days we were there, but you got this really nice waterfall. This is like one of my worst pictures, but I wanted to show it because it's the hotel we stayed at, and I think today it may be being torn down. The news reports are that they're tearing down all the hotels, all the infrastructure that was built up there. This was brand new. They just opened it the day we were there, but it was an old building. The building itself was built by Japanese Koreans, a decade or 2 decades before that. Hyundai came in, put $10 million into. There wasn't any steel in the building. The guy said they had to create internally a steel structure to make sure it was safe, and air conditioning. But a really nice experience, I think, for us. There's a little plan. This is, as I say, Kim Il-sung's 10th year anniversary of his death. And from my hotel window right here, I could see these workers going in to pay homage to this picture over here of Kim Il-sung meeting with children. It's quite interesting watching this. And then especially impressed with this woman who comes up. There's nobody else watching. She's on her own, as far as I can tell. See her umbrella down there. Comes up and pays her respect to Kim Il-sung. Very interesting. I went outside after that, and the guards told me to stop taking pictures, so I didn't. I thought I might want to go back, so I didn't take any more pictures. This is when we left. That's kind of the way it looks now. It's not a black and white picture, but it looks black and white. Empty. The site is empty now, and for 10 years now, nothing has happened there. They're tearing it down. Very sad experience. So the story, I think, is not a real happy one. Not a happy one at all. A lot of lost money, huge amount of effort went into these projects, and they've dried up. So what's for the future? Can they be resurrected? I don't know. But as I suggested, I think they could be. I would be in favor of the new government and conservative government in South Korea, President Yoon, taking a close look at these and sort of looking at the fundamental economic imperatives there and seeing if there's a way that they could be made profitable to both sides. Actually, I think there could. And this issue of payment to workers, I think it can be resolved much more easily now than it could have been then, because now one thing Kim Jong-un has done, he's solidified the monetary system there. He's done it by really not printing much money or pushing the economy into a huge recession, and that's strengthened the won. And there's more and more people that are now working in the market economy. I think it would be much less of a stretch to require that Kaesong and Kumgangsan pay the workers directly in money wages. And with that, the money, you see how important it is for that to circulate around, create more industry, more markets, more shops. That didn't happen. It's when Kaesong closed in 2016, sort of nothing happened. It's kind of like a dead end, all the workers. I don't know what the workers did, but I suspect they were reassigned to state enterprises somewhere else. Any market economy, you pull out something like that, and it would be a disaster. In North Korea, it wasn't a disaster because it wasn't a good thing to begin with. It was just, flat. And hopefully some good people can make some good decisions on both sides of the DMZ, figure out a way that something like this really could pay off to both sides. I'll stop my talk now and let y'all, I'll be happy to take any questions.
So, Bill, we'll get to some detailed questions at the end, but I just had one quick one before we move on. What was the reason behind why they shut down Kaesong? What caused that to, that relationship to dissolve?
Yeah, it was up and down, of course, its whole tumultuous history. It started in 2000, actually they opened in 2004. In 2006, North Korea did its first nuclear test, and it survived that, kept puddling along. That's sort of a lot of energy went into this thing. But over time, there were several other incidents, Cheonan incident, where the North Koreans sank the South Korean Navy ship, and then they shelled the islands there. Gradually, I think, and then the Park Geun-hye government got very frustrated with it. There was some shelling going on. North Koreans were complaining about it. Just sort of eventually South Koreans just pull a plug on it. Why are we? A lot of it was the idea that this money, it was a lot of money, going in U.S. dollars, $100 bills every month going across the DMZ into the North Korean government's hands, and the idea that it was paying for the nuclear program. Right. Well, I don't think directly, but indirectly it would have been. But mostly importantly to me is it wasn't going to the North Korean workers. So I was glad to see it close, and I think most of the South Korean public was glad to see it close.
So there was probably, you're saying there was some reluctance on the part of South Korea to be giving all of this money to North Korea and have it go towards supporting their military and building up their military. Was there also problems on the North Korean side where they felt like, their population was being, corrupted or capitalized?
Yeah, that's a real good question because, the North Koreans kept looking like they wanted to keep going. They kept making adjustments. Kumgangsan especially, they changed the fee. The fee in Kumgangsan was $12 million a month initially. That ran into trouble, and the North Koreans allowed the fee to be lowered. So I think the North Korean side saw a lot of good coming from it, money basically, and didn't want to stop it. Right. But Kumgangsan's another, unfortunate incident where a tourist was shot dead because she climbed over a fence to see the beach, and the woman guard shot her dead, right? And North Korean, they could have apologized and made some cut, but they didn't. They didn't apologize, and it just rankled too many feelings, I think.
Right. But I did hear at one point North Korea was asking to triple the wages of the workers in the Kaesong area, right? And that was a big...
Well, there's always arguments over the pay rate. I don't think it was tripling, but they kept arguing over the wage. And for the South Korean enterprise, it's very important. They're paying $140. And if it goes up 10% or 5%, it's really cutting into their margin. they're really competing with people in Vietnam and other countries. And at the 140, the maximum rate that they were paying out, they were making money, but not a huge amount of money. I always felt, maybe I was wrong, but these arguments over the wages were kind of ludicrous, because the real wage is what they're paid. And what they're paid was like 10% of that, maybe even less than that. So I would have been fine with raising their wages. I wanted to raise the wages for the worker themselves, not for the North Korean government. But that sort of shows you, to me, at the get-go, there were sort of wrong ideas about how people were paid, and the Korean government paid lip service. Our government paid lip service to the idea they were paid this relatively good rate, and no, they really weren't. So the money was going into, a certain amount of it is fine, certain amount of taxes, everybody pays taxes, but I think the economics itself worked pretty well, at those wages. That's why I'm kind of intrigued by the idea that you could put it back together and everybody make money. But some important hard thinking needs to go into how would you do the risk insurance, for example. Korean taxpayer paid all the risk. The Korean companies lost money. A lot of it, I think most of it was recouped through their insurance, but of course the insurance is paid by South Korean taxpayers. Right. So it was more than $1 billion lost to the South Korean side.
Okay, well, I think we'll give you a little break for a while, and we'll hear from Paul. So thank you so much. Very informative and very interesting, and some good ideas for us to take forward. I'd like to introduce our next speaker, Paul Chia, who is, he's been active in the Dutch IT sector for more than 25 years. And he studied cultural anthropology in Amsterdam, where he graduated with a paper on the Indian software industry. And in 1995, Paul founded the company GPI Consultancy, as an international outsourcing company. So he has contacts with companies in many parts of the world, and his business contacts with North Korea began in 1997. And his first visit to the country took place in 2006. So he now organizes business missions to this country on a regular basis. I think they've been put on hold for a while because of COVID. But his last visit to the country was in 2019. His tours have been for academics, for journalists, and for business people as well. So, Paul, I want to welcome you and give you your opportunity to present your ideas here.
Yeah, thank you, Roger. Good afternoon and good evening, everybody. I will first share my screen with you. Is my presentation visible to everybody?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
So my first visit to North Korea was in the year 2006, although I had contact with especially North Korean IT companies for already 10 years. My first contact with an IT company was in, I think, 1996. But it took me 10 years before I could visit the country for the first time. And I will show you a few pictures I was able to take in the Kaesong Industrial Zone, which I visited in 2007. So in 2007, it was already beginning. There were the first South Korean companies were already active in the zone, and during this visit in 2007, we were shown a model how the Kaesong Industrial Zone would look like in the future. So what was already existing was the part left on the bottom side with the blue buildings. That was already being built and being used by the South Korean companies. But the plan was to expand this area on the left side, but also on the opposite side, the right side of this picture, the right bottom side, would also be part of the Kaesong Industrial Complex, next to the Kaesong city, which is located on the top side of this model. So it was quite a big plan they had, and it looks very promising. And also we as a delegation, when we visited Kaesong, we were quite optimistic. Also, when we were shown around in this zone, a lot of new buildings and new factories were being built, new roads, new traffic lights, even the trees were new. So it was a quite busy zone at that time. And already the first South Korean companies were active. By the way, this is not a company, this is one of the several office buildings. This is the Inter-Korean Liaison Office being built at the moment. I will come back to this Inter-Korean Liaison Office later in my presentation. But this was one of the several office buildings being built. This is one of the South Korean factories, a garment factory, and already a large number of North Korean workers were already active at that time in 2007. Another factory which we visited was a South Korean electric cable company, and they were assembling different kinds of cables to be used in, I think, refrigerators or cars. It was also a rather large enterprise. So a lot of activity was already visible in 2007, and it was still the beginning phase of the zone. Unfortunately, it was closed in 2016, and all the optimistic feelings I had were already gone around that time. But in 2019, this was, by the way, my last visit to Pyongyang. No, sorry, this is 2018. I was in September 2018 in Pyongyang, and at that time we were stuck in a traffic jam. It happened with the visit of then President Moon to Pyongyang, and we had to wait quite a long time before his cars passed our street. So at that time, we were again a little bit optimistic. Also, we had the summits between Trump and Kim Jong-un. So in 2018, I was again a little bit optimistic. Unfortunately, this optimism didn't last long. In the previous sheet, I showed you the new building of the Inter-Korean Liaison Office. And in 2020, this is the building you saw, the building in front of the high-rise building. So what was being built new in 2007 was being destroyed in 2020 because the North Koreans were fed up with the South Korean policy of refusing to reopen the Kaesong Industrial Complex. About the Kumgang mountain area, Bill already spoke quite positive about it. It is indeed a very beautiful mountain range to visit. I was able to visit Kumgangsan in, I think, 2019. It is indeed extremely beautiful to visit. And this is one of the tracks they made, walking tracks, especially for the South Korean tourists in this particular area. This is our North Korean guide. And unfortunately, we were, with our delegation, almost the only foreign delegation visiting this area during the day of our stay. it was quite empty, unfortunately, while over the years, I think between 1 or 2 million South Koreans were able to visit this part of North Korea. And there are still several nice hotels, by the way. And this is the dining room, completely empty, only for our small delegation, and the rest of the hotel was empty. This is one of the floating hotels in the area. And this is the hotel, by the way, which is currently, as we speak, being demolished. This is a floating hotel owned by a South Korean company. It was not only used for the tourists, but also for the reunions between the North and the South Koreans in this area. And again, a quite successful example of North and South collaboration is symbolically now, or not symbolically anymore, it's now physically destroyed in the sense of a demolished hotel. So I was quite optimistic around 2006, 2007. I'm now, of course, quite pessimistic 13, 14, 15 years later. And it's time to think what we can do now in this new Cold War situation. I think in the first place, more communication is needed. North Korea is at the moment quite isolated, I would say, especially with the South Koreans, with Americans, and to a certain extent also with Europeans. And what we have seen in the past examples with Kaesong, in Kaesong there has been a lot of, let's say, light industry, like garments. But if you want to produce garments, there is not a lot of communication involved, actually. This is another example of a garment producer. This is a Dutch client we took with us to North Korea a couple of years ago. And it is not that difficult to produce garments in North Korea. This gentleman, he took with him some examples of garments which were being produced at that time in China, but he wanted to produce them in North Korea. So he brought some garments with them. Representatives of a North Korean company, they look at it and they make another example. During the short stay, it is possible to make an example, and based on the quality of this North Korean example, the Dutch client can decide if he wants to work with this North Korean garment company for a large number of pieces. But there is not really a lot of communication involved. And that is also the same situation with the Kaesong Industrial Complex. Of course, there were a lot of North Korean workers, around 50,000 at the top. There were a lot of South Korean managers at the time, hundreds, but there was not really a lot of intense people-to-people communication involved, I would say. It was a little bit shallow communication, I would like to call it. And it's the same with tourism. You can go to North Korea as a tourist, and you will meet your guide, of course, but there is not a lot of deep, let's say, interhuman communication involved. It is often quite shallow. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in this situation at the moment, I think we need some deeper human-to-human communication. And I'm especially interested in high-tech collaboration, because high-tech collaboration requires deeper communication between individuals than, for example, making garments or guiding a tour group. So I would like to use the new Unjong high-tech industrial zone as an example, with potential for high-tech collaboration and with more, hopefully, meaningful communication. It's not a well-known zone. It's near Pyongyang, by the way. Most of the South most of the North Korean economic zones are in the border areas, and Kaesong is an example, Kumgangsan is an example, but there's also this Rason zone near the Russian border. There are zones near the Chinese border, but the Unjong one is one of the few in the center of the country, you could say, in the northern part of Pyongyang. It's not far from the Sunan International Airport, and it's quite special. It's not only because it is located near Pyongyang, but it's also not being managed by a Ministry of Economic Affairs, but it's managed by the State Academy of Sciences. And this Academy of Sciences has a lot of institutes of basic and applied science, and they employ more than 1,000 scientists in this area of Unjong. And the plan is to build a modern technology development zone with a focus on information technology, nanotechnology, new materials, bioengineering, so high-tech stuff like that, including sustainable energy, by the way. 2.4 square kilometers, and first section is with IT and technical engineering, and the second section is related to high-tech agriculture and biofuel. And the goal is to do research and development, trying to make new products and also to market these products not only inside North Korea, but also for the global markets. It also includes a business incubator, so small teams with good ideas can develop these ideas into commercial products and also try to find venture capital. And there are basically two cooperation types, the joint venture or the single development by the foreign investor. I believe, well, joint ventures are not allowed anymore. In the past, it was quite popular if you want to do business with North Korea, but since the last round of United Nations sanctions, it is not allowed for foreigners to do a joint venture with a North Korean company anymore. It is illegal. There are some exceptions, but in general, it is not allowed anymore. So the option is to start your own company as a foreign investor, let's say a wholly foreign-owned foreign company, which is not very popular yet in North Korea, but there are some examples, and this type of activity is allowed according to the United Nations sanctions list. And of course, you can start easily a wholly owned foreign company in a special economic zone. That's one of the reasons the North Koreans have set up the special economic zone system. Apart from the high-tech activities, which should be the main activity for this zone, there are also some infrastructure-related investment projects available. For example, a guest house. If the zone will grow, they will expect a larger number of foreign visitors and also a larger number of domestic visitors. So there is a project proposal available for a guest house in this zone. And something which is not, as far as I know, available yet in North Korea is electric buses. So there's already a project proposal for an electric bus demonstration project. And there are also plans for building solar panels in the hills around the zone. Those were some infrastructure projects, but there are already some examples of other investment opportunities. This is a startup investment proposal. We all know origami, the Japanese paper folding culture. It's quite popular in Eastern Asian countries. It's not easily available on a computer as a game, for example. So this is a North Korean startup company. They have developed a computer simulation software, 3D origami simulation software, and they are now searching for foreign investors. What is already taking place in this Unjong HighTech Zone is activities related to computer software and integrated circuits. So they are assembling ICs for different types of computer hardware equipment. We can also think about developing software. And what I already said, there is not so much deep communication involved in, let's say, tourism or making garments. You do not have a lot of contacts with the garment workers. But that's totally different with if you have to deal with highly skilled software engineers. Developing software is quite complicated. There's a lot of communication needed. And the advantage is that you will develop very deep contacts, interpersonal contacts with your North Korean software engineers. This is an example of a German entrepreneur. He is building software in Pyongyang, but because it takes a long time to build complicated software, it requires a lot of communication. He decided to set up his own company in North Korea. So that's a nice example of how to deal with North Koreans on with deep communication on a daily basis during a very long time. And this can build trust. And I think trust is something which is now needed in this Cold War situation. And of course, you can also use the North Korean software engineers to build websites, mobile apps, or technical software. And by the way, when the Kaesong Industrial Complex was flourishing, or the Kumgangsan was doing well, also Samsung Electronics was using North Korean software engineers to build the embedded software inside their mobile phones. So at that time, there was a lot of collaboration going on, and unfortunately, it all stopped over the years. But by the way, there's a shortage of software engineers in the Western world. So you can very well use the North Koreans. There are a lot of experienced software engineers available. And of course, the tariffs are much lower than in other Asian countries. Making computer games is also an option. An example of a North Korean game is Go, the Asian chess version, which is quite complicated to build it into a computer game. But the North Koreans managed to do this, and they even won a number of prizes, contests with this North Korean Go computer game. And of course, North Korea is already well known for its animation industry, which is very labor intensive. And this is something which can easily be done in North Korea. And even in the past, American companies such as Walt Disney already tried working with the North Koreans. But of course, this is an example from a long time ago. This is a picture from 2019 in which a Swedish delegation visited the Unjong HighTech Zone to learn about the zone and to discuss already potential collaboration. So I think European companies and also European governments are now the most promising sector to start engagement with North Korea. Also from the Netherlands point of view, we have seen some recent examples of interest. This is an example of the State Academy of Sciences. A delegation of this North Korean academy visited the Netherlands. It's part of the Sustainable Energy Department, and they were interested in different types of sustainable energy. And here they visited some wind turbines in the northern part of the Netherlands. Also, delegations of the Academy, they took part in agricultural related research activities with a Dutch counterpart, with a Dutch university. This is in the field of potato research. This is, by the way, a Dutch delegation visiting a North Korean potato field. This is another delegation from the Academy of Sciences. The North Korean delegation, they were interested in modern greenhouses, in which they visited a number of Dutch companies active in the field of greenhouses. So there are quite a few examples already of Dutch academic collaboration with the North Koreans. So I would say in this Cold War situation, and there is not much communication taking place with the traditional countries like the South Koreans with the economic zones. But nevertheless, more communication and engagement is needed with North Korea. And since business projects from the South are difficult or almost impossible, especially with the new South Korean president, I would say it seems rather impossible at the moment. I would say that small-scale collaboration, and that could be small-scale cooperation in the field of IT outsourcing, for example, or with universities, it's feasible. And especially from Europe, I think it is very well feasible. And the Unjong HighTech Development Zone is an example of a zone which could be used for this type of cooperation. Unfortunately, I have not been able to visit North Korea in 2020 and 2021, and I'm still not sure if there will be an opportunity this year. Otherwise, I would be happy to arrange visits to the Unjong zone. But if it is required to arrange meetings with the North Koreans by email or online, that is still possible, of course. And if you want to have face-to-face meetings with the North Korean delegations in Europe, that's also a viable option. So for any questions, I'm always available, and you can always send me an email. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very interesting presentation. I know that we have one participant here who's very interested in the agricultural industry and using greenhouses. So I'm sure he was very interested in your last couple of slides there where you were talking about the agricultural exchange. So thank you for that. And I think in general, some of the comments I've seen in the chat really are expressing the idea that, you know, what you're doing is, or what you've been doing with these scientific and economic exchanges is really opening up an avenue of hope. I just wanted to throw out one question here for you. And I know this is kind of a big question that everybody has, is what are the security concerns or the issues that people may be worried about in terms of giving technology or giving access to technology to the North Koreans, that this might be used in ways that are not, you know, so good? Like we're all aware of the hacking that has gone on with North Korea trying to hack, you know, Western companies and so on. So how do you address those issues?
We have to be careful, of course, because there are a very large number of United Nations sanctions related to North Korea. And I wouldn't advise anybody to not do your own homework properly. So we have to be very careful to be on the legal side of everything. And for example, I think it is an American guy, a couple of years ago, he went to North Korea to take part in a conference about bitcoins and cyber currency, and it was promoted as an event to evade sanctions. This American guy is now in trouble in the United States because this is an example of being very uncareful, of course. And even if you want to do something with universities, we have to be careful that it will not violate the spirit of the United Nations sanctions. So, for example, if a university wants to do something in the field of nuclear energy, it is almost impossible. But of course, if a Dutch university wants to do something with the prevention of potato diseases, well, that's an example of something which is completely legal and without any problem. And of course, if you want to make animation in North Korea, it is not sanctioned at all. It will not give any problem. I can imagine if you want to develop, let's say, security software in North Korea, it might give you some problems. So we have to be careful, but I'm talking about those topics which are completely safe. And if you want to talk about biofuel, for example, or solar energy, I don't think there are any problems related to this. We are talking about scientific collaboration, knowledge transfer. But of course, we have to do our homework very careful, not to violate any sanctions, of course.
Good, thank you. Let's bring Bill Brown back onto the discussion here for a little bit. And we have a couple of questions. I just wanted to throw out one. How do you manage money in terms of these relationships, given that the difficulties in banking issues, and I believe that North Korea is not part of the SWIFT banking system. So how do you pay and exchange money with these companies, Paul?
Well, what Russia is experiencing now, being cut off from the SWIFT network, is something North Korea has been experiencing for a long time already. So payments using the banks is impossible. You have to bring money in cash, for example, or it's very basic, old-fashioned ways of paying the North Koreans.
So it's bags of cash that you have to bring on an airplane?
Yes, unfortunately, it is not allowed to bring large numbers of money into North Korea. You can only bring small amounts. So that's another difficult way of paying the North Koreans. Yes. Life is not easy if you want to do that type of business with the North.
Bill, did you have any questions that you wanted to ask Paul, or vice versa, based on the presentations that each gave in here?
Yeah, let me just a couple of comments on your great presentation. And admittedly, so you're quite a different, you've had quite a different occupation than I have. I've been watching North Korea from a long distance. You've been in there doing business, and I've never done business with them. But I have watched them carefully for a long, long time. And my very first experience looking at North Korea in the late 70s, 76, 77, was, very much what you're talking about now. There's a huge number of Europeans there developing all kinds of businesses in North Korea. They were all using basically European taxpayers' money. And they were spending it lavishly, bringing in Volvos, bringing in a lot of steel making equipment, non-ferrous metals, about more than $1 billion worth of equipment, European equipment, which the companies, of course, loved. They got to sell it. And the taxpayers were never told what the bill was. And North Korea never paid them back. Huge, huge disaster for North Korea when it did not pay debt to European banks. They defaulted on bank debt in about 77, 78, and they've never really recouped. They've been bankrupt essentially ever since then. So I'm not saying you can't do business with North Korea, but you sort of have to understand they haven't paid their debts. And if you're thinking of loaning money to them, you're probably not going to get it back. So in all those kind of difficulties, I'm I'm thinking there's never been a workout, Europeans especially, they've never worked out their huge debt problem they've covered it over, papered it over. And when your delegations go, they probably don't have any idea of that history. But if they apply for credit from the Bank of England or from the European banks, they're not going to get it, right? Not because of the sanctions, but because of the debt default. So I'm thinking there needs to be, I like the idea of engagement at a local level, a personal level that you're doing, but I'm thinking it avoids the much more important necessity for comprehensive macro level engagement with North Korea that solves some of these huge financial issues that have basically held North Korea back so far. As I say, the country is full of these joint ventures. For 70 years, they've been getting these things. And what's their productivity? Their productivity is probably productivity of capital and labor together is probably the worst in the whole world. I mean, they're a very extremely poor country. They used to not be that way. So somebody's got to think what has gone on here and what's the motivation? Why are you doing business in North? If it's to make money, that's very understandable. If it's to do something good, well, that's good too. But I think there's some bigger issues here that need to be resolved.
Paul, do you have some response there?
Yeah, I don't think, I think Bill is portraying it a little bit very negatively at the moment.
Absolutely. It's an extremely
it is not, when we look at Pyongyang, for example, my first visit to Pyongyang was in 2006. And my last visit was in 2019. So in those 13, 14 years, it's a short period of time, but I could already see a lot of positive changes. It is not a stagnant country. It's quite, I wouldn't say very dynamic, but you can see positive changes almost every year. And as far as business is concerned, surprisingly, Holland is a very small country. But you can go to the shops and you can see Heineken beer. You can see Philips electronics. For example, a lot of foreign products are available and they are being bought. They are not as showcases in some shops, but people are using them as well. And as far as doing business, the Dutch companies, and especially most European companies, they are not investing a lot at the moment. But for example, we have maybe 5 travel agencies in the Netherlands, and they are doing trips to North Korea. It does not require any investment to set up a travel agency and promoting trips to North Korea. If you want to build animation, it does not require a lot of investments. So the business deal is quite simple. They do the work and you pay them if you are happy with the work. Or you bring a tourist to the country and you pay the guide. It's not that complicated. But my problem is it is on a very small scale. And we need to make this scale a little bit bigger at the moment, especially because of the Cold War situation. So even a small project is fine for me, as long as there are every time more and more at the moment. Because if we don't support those projects, I'm a little bit worried about the situation. There is a Cold War around North Korea, and we don't want to see this deteriorating the situation. We want to see it improve despite the Cold War scenario at the moment.
So we need to kind of wrap up here, or we could go on for another half an hour, I'm sure. But I'd like to give each of you just a minute to kind of say a few words in conclusion, just to wrap up. So Bill, would you like to go first?
Yeah, as I say, I think it is imperative that we engage with North Korea and improve communications, like Paul is saying. My point, though, is that it needs to be on a principled basis, and we can't throw out principles of economics. First of all, I like to point out people need to be paid real money. Of course, there's some in North Korea that are getting very rich with this cash economy. People that foreigners deal with tend to be speaking, very well educated. But most of the population is deathly poor, incredibly poor, outside of Pyongyang, even in Pyongyang. It's an extremely wasteful use of resources. And those kind of things, I'm agreeing things have changed. Things have improved a lot from the famine. Don't forget the famine that killed maybe 1 million North Koreans. It's improved a lot since then. And I think Kim Jong-un has made some remarkable progress in marketizing the economy, in monetizing the economy. It's all very good. And I think that kind of work needs to be encouraged. But it always tends to run into the socialist Marxist phenomena where they hate the use of money. They hate the use of normal banking. They don't want people to own their own capital. That's the fundamental problem with their system. So without ownership of capital, ownership of property, ownership of their houses, ownership of their piece of their factory, productivity of the capital is just extremely weak. As I say, probably the worst in the world. So there's a lot of things that need to be addressed in order to help out North Korea.
Thank you. And Paul, do you have a few closing words for us?
Yeah, I would like to say a few words about the UPF, the Peace Federation, because they have had a long history with North Korea. And although the ideology is completely different than with the North Korean regime, nevertheless, there is enough option also in the past for collaboration. For example, my favorite hotel in Pyongyang is the Kumgangsan Hotel. And there has been some involvement of the UPF in the past, or the Unification Church in the past, with this hotel. And opposite the hotel, there is this huge conference center to be used for different kinds of peace-related activities, which has been, I think, funded even by the church. So I would say for UPF, they should investigate options to renew this collaboration with the North Koreans, because I think there are a lot of options for collaboration which are maybe not yet sufficiently discovered. And I'm sure the North Koreans would love to renew this partnership as it used to be maybe 20 years ago.
Thank you. And certainly when it opens up again and you organize your next tour, don't forget to send me an invitation to join.
Yeah, me too. Me too.
So I just wanted to bring up Dr. Michael Jenkins to say a few closing words as the president of the Universal Peace Federation International. Dr. Jenkins.
Well, Roger, congratulations on another tremendous program. And thank you, Bill, and thank you, Paul. I think that so much was conveyed today, so much understanding. And that's what we're looking for, positive understanding that really brings the facts to us and opens the door for engagement. As Paul mentioned, our movement does have the ownership of the Kumgangsan Hotel, and we have people there, and we have also the Peace Center. And it's still active, and there's still ongoing communication. So we look forward to that. And although the organization founded by Mother Moon has the Washington Times, which is quite conservative, still there's an air of respect because there's been ongoing meetings with Kim Jong-un, Kim Jong-il, and also Kim Il-sung. It started with the grandfather. There's not any kind of attitude of anything but finding a way to allow North and South Korea to partner, to prosper together, to come into what Bill was talking about, a fair and equitable system for the people to have freedoms and prosperity. And I think we're looking forward to that time. It has to come. It has to come in Europe also. So thank you all. And Roger, once again, congratulations. This is a great webinar. I want to put this series together, Roger, and put it out there kind of as a little course on people who want to understand more about North Korea. These forums are just excellent. Thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you very much. And tune in again next week, same time, same channel for more on North Korea. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.